Hey, it's Bob Francis here with Go Full Throttle Television. I'm joined today by Brian Twinning. Brian's with BETSPERTS. We spend a lot of time together in the media center following racing. Brian brings a unique perspective to the program today. He comes from the betting side of how we do analysis, look at odds, make predictions, because there's money on the line. So we're going to have an exciting conversation. Brian, welcome, and tell the audience about your background.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me on today. As you said, I work for a company called BetSperts, focusing primarily on team ball and stick sports, but I do have a passion for stock car racing, in particular NASCAR. And the last couple of years, I've really dove in to the betting side of things, and I produce content for one of our properties called BleacherNation.com. And then I have a personal project on the side, the Angle of Pursuit podcast that I do with my friend Kyle, where we do 2 shows a week of betting analysis and pre and post practice kind of sports book shopping in terms of odds for the upcoming race.
That's awesome. Well, there's been a lot of fun happening in the racing world, and I thought just to give our audience some perspective to sort of dive in and differentiate between how we in the that cater to the NASCAR fantasy world look and analyze data and make predictions and recommendations, and how that sort of differs from your world on the betting side. So Darlington was a disaster for our prediction models, Brian, because we had bet the farm and had predicted all of the AI models said Larson is the guy, and in
Yep.
lap 4 he's in the wall. And so it was not a great day for fantasy racing. But how did you in the betting world look at that event, the Darlington track with all its history? There were some clear favorites, but you probably took a different approach to that race than we did in fantasy racing.
Yeah, I think one of the major differences about fantasy and betting is like betting, it's all about market entry and the odds at which you're getting a specific driver. For instance, Kyle Larson, he was the favorite opening up the week around 4-1, and then post practice and qualifying, his number didn't move at all. So if you were looking to get involved with Kyle Larson betting wise to win the race, you were betting a lot of money in order to actually come home with some sort of profit. Whereas guys like Tyler Reddick, his number floated a little bit longer, considered the second best guy at running the wall, which is the preferred line at Darlington. And then personally for me, Ryan Blaney, just because of the speed that he had shown all season, was a guy that I was looking to find live, which is something that you can't really do in fantasy other than maybe bringing somebody from the garage. And betting, a lot of times I'm sitting there watching outright numbers move live during the race and trying to find a way to get exposure to what looks like the best car that day. And in that case, it was Ryan Blaney, which we all know what happened there. The Kyle Larson shenanigans of late race cautions kind of ruined Ryan Blaney people like myself. And so, yeah, that was an interesting race from us for us.
Right. So in the world of predictions, as it relates to NASCAR fantasy, as you mentioned, we have one platform we're watching. That's NASCAR's fantasy racing platform. And we call them the Fast Five. Who are the 5 drivers we are racing that week and who's in the garage? With that limiter that you only have until the last lap of the second stage, if you're going to make a substitution, you have to do it by that point, because once stage 3 starts, whoever is in the garage stays in the garage. But I've watched you work in the media center for lots of races now, and you've got multiple screens going. You're watching different sports books, different odds makers. You're pulling information from everywhere, and I guess to look for those opportunities like you had for Darlington.
Yeah, it's something that, especially this year in particular, sports books have becoming a lot. I wouldn't say that they're sharp so much as they're really trying to limit exposure to outright numbers, and they're opening up with 4, 5, 6 guys, sometimes inside 10-1, which is kind of the number of the favorites. And so it's becoming a lot harder to find pre-practice and qualifying or even pre-race values. So watching the board live and trying to differentiate between who actually has a good car and who doesn't, or a race winning car and who's just going to run well, is the way to go for me anyways this year in the Cup Series in particular.
Right. So let's move on to Bristol, because that was its own unique set of circumstances. At the top level, there were those that were reeling from putting all of that weight on Kyle Larson, heavily favored at Darlington. Would he be able to come back? Boy, he cleaned up in the fall last year, came in as a strong favorite. but there was concern in the fantasy world about, the recovery from such a horrible previous race at Darlington. That ended up not being the case. And for us, our Fast Five predictions that came out on Friday were spot on, and we had our highest point total of the season for the Bristol race, led, of course, by Kyle Larson. How did you and BetSperts look at the Bristol race and educate our audience about how that went?
Well, let's just say that after practice, I don't think there was a single person in the NASCAR betting community that was confident in anything to go to the market and say, oh, yeah, this guy's going to win. Because everything that we were told during practice was that this was going to be the spring race. When all week leading up to practice, the anticipation was it was going to be a repeat of the fall, which is why Kyle Larson was such a heavy favorite coming into the race. And then only for the race to look nothing like practice and turn into a fall duplication, and Kyle Larson just absolutely throttle the field. So when looking at it from the betting perspective, Larson reopened as a huge favorite, like plus 250, which you do not bet that before a race goes off. At least I don't. I'm not touching that because anything can happen in a NASCAR race. Larson almost biffed it himself late in Bristol with about 25 laps to go. He clipped the wall. So that could have been the end of a large wager.
Right. Yeah. Reading social media and listening to SiriusXM NASCAR radio, you heard a wide variety of opinions about that race. I personally, I love to see someone display their craftsmanship. And so while some might have been frustrated that, okay, it was a Larson blowout, he smoked them, on Saturday, winning the Xfinity race, going away, and then he took care of business on Sunday. As soon as Cliff Daniels and Kyle figured out after that first stage, all right, this whole tire thing, forget that, go, put the hammer down, let's do it. And then he made a clinic out of the rest of the day. But watching him, one of the great things about Bristol is there is nonstop action.
Yes.
Was Larson going to be able to navigate through 36 other cars and not get tangled up or caught up in a crash? So there was suspense. There was the thrill of watching the master craftsman exercise his expertise and dominate a race. But there was also that moment by moment drama because they caught the tail of the field after a few laps, and who the usual suspects were there. Denny Hamlin was right there chasing. And I think that made for that continued drama through the race.
Yeah, and then I'll add one more thing as a bettor looking at Bristol. We would prefer the race to go off exactly like it just did this last Sunday, but preferably having practice look more similar to what we're going to expect during the race. Because if you tell us, just like the drivers and the crew chiefs say all the time, if you tell us when the cautions are going to come out, we're going to know when to pit. Whereas as sports bettors, if we know who has the fastest car, more times than not, like that guy is going to be there at the end. And in the case of Bristol, when Kyle Larson unloads like he usually does, and if the tires don't fall off at all, he's going to smash the fields. We actually prefer the race to go off like that and be boring from a novice fan's perspective because it's better for trying to profit.
Right. Well, it's been a great segment opening up. We're going to take a few minutes for a commercial break here, and we'll be right back with Brian Twinning from BetSperts.
If you're buzzed and doing this, to make yourself feel okay to drive,
ZWX.
you're not okay to drive.
YGKLVW. Regular you.
And we're back. Thanks for Joining us here on Go Full Throttle Television, we're back with Brian Twinning from the BETSPERTS. Brian is also the host of Angle of Pursuit podcast. You can catch that on all your favorite podcasting channels. Brian, now we're 9 races deep into the season. Long way to go. We have this Easter break to everybody to sort of catch their breath. But there have been some surprises, at least for our prediction models and in the NASCAR fantasy world, where some things are up, some things are down. To kick us off for this segment, I just wanted to read you this headline I wrote for a story I'm working on, and it's JGR flips the script. Last year at this time, Hendrick had already had a number of wins in the bank, and they never looked back. They sort of, from the organization standpoint, Hendrick led pretty much the entire season, and now you have Christopher Bell with 3 wins, Denny Hamlin with 2 wins. So of the 9 races, Joe Gibbs Racing's got 5 wins on the board, Hendrick trailing at 3. And, the surprise of the season probably is Josh Berry. No offense, awesome driver, Wood Brothers, famed car. But the Fords have only in that one race really showed themselves at the end. With Berry winning at Las Vegas. So this next headline we're working on and this next storyline is really about what did Joe Gibbs Racing do to sort of flip things around and have such early success? And part 2 of this is this going to be a replay of the 2023 season and the 2024 season where Fords were weak early on, but then they show up when it counts? Blaney winning the 23 championship, Logano winning the 24 championship. Will the Fords do it again this year? Brian, how are you looking at it?
Just looking at Ford to begin with, I think it's clear that Ryan Blaney is really the only guy that's not part of the Hendrick or JGR camp that has a race-winning car as we enter the break. I mean, when you look at Las Vegas, Homestead, Darlington, and then even like Martinsville to a lesser extent, I don't think he necessarily had the speed that he traditionally shows there, but I think there's at least 3 races this year where Ryan Blaney was by far the fastest car, which doesn't always mean you're going to win the race, but there was a lot of things out of his control that resulted in him not winning those events. So from a Ford perspective, I think clearly Blaney has speed. Joey Logano, he's going to always do what he does. He's going to work the system. I mean, he said it last year where he talks about if the scoring system was different, we would probably plan our races different. I mean, Logano still sits inside the top 10 in points right now. He's got 2 stage wins, tied for the 3rd most in the sport. So I'm not really worried about them. But, when you look at Hendrick and JGR, it is quite amazing that both Christopher Bell and Denny Hamlin were in position to win 3. Bell getting it done, and Hamlin just coming off another runner-up performance, which in terms of surprises, personally, I'm surprised at how well Denny has begun this season after last year not really showing race-winning pace for the last about 2/3 of the season.
Right. And I think another part of this JGR dominance early, I might be biased because I come from dirt track background in sprint cars, but the reversal of the policy that kept Bell out of doing World of Outlaws and high limit sprint cars off the dirt tracks. I was there at the LA Coliseum at the Clash when that policy was announced, and at the driver JGR press conference, Bell was pressed by me and other NASCAR reporters. Well, what does this really mean? I mean, and Denny Hamlin actually jumped in and interrupted Bell because he was struggling to articulate something that didn't come off as negative. He's not going to throw the boss, Coach Gibbs, under the bus, but he's going to comply with his driver contract and the policy. But Hamlin jumps in and says, I think what Christopher's trying to say is Coach wants him to win a championship. Coach wants him to be in the best position to win the NASCAR Cup and doesn't want to risk like what happened to Alex Bowman, where they go sprint car racing and get injured. However, Bell goes to Oklahoma during the offseason. He cleans up in the sprint car early season stuff, goes to Florida, wins at the Outlaws. He's now racing occasional events with high limit sprint cars. And even his teammate, young Ty Gibbs, showed up at the dirt track for the high limit sprint car race while we were all in Las Vegas. So clearly, I believe there is something there that has probably been proven out by Larson, by Stenhouse, by Blaney and others who have dabbled, even Chase Elliott, William Byron. But in the sprint car world, Larson's a busy guy. And he's out racing every time he can get in a race car. And I look at what Bell did during the offseason and the early season and can't help to think, Brian, that led to this early momentum and 3 wins on the board.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. That's basically the same narrative that I was preaching after he won Coda, in that you could tell there was a sense of relief and just more enjoyment in what he was doing on Sundays, as it became less of a job and more of back to his passion of racing, now that he's able to kind of separate himself from the Cup Series, a couple days a week, maybe a day a week, to go run a lower series. And it's something that people have talked about with Kyle Larson. He never looks too far ahead because he always has some other race happening before the next Cup Series race, which probably helps keep him grounded, and which is why he's so good.
Right. Yeah, and here's another surprise that I'm looking at, sort of looking at 9 races, is Joey Logano, the reigning Cup champion, is sitting 9th in points right now, does not have a race win. So he's showed some consistency and speed to get enough stage points and finishing places to stay top 10. But I know a lot of Joey Logano fans are worried. This early season here to the break is cause for concern.
Yeah, kind of like I said when I was leading into this, I'm not too worried about Logano. Personally, I did play his under win total this year to begin the year. It's an odd season, and we all know the Joey Logano even odd San Francisco Giants correlation. So there's that. But yeah, Logano and Paul Wolfe, I don't think there's a single team in the Cup Series that I would rather have on my side or be backing when the going gets tough and they need a win or they need a really good finish. And I think as we come out of the break, we're going to Talladega. Who's one of the strongest cars there? Joey Logano. And then we're going to go to Kansas, which, yes, the Fords in general have struggled at 1.5s in the next gen car, but Logano has been much faster this year. The finishing, the results on paper don't necessarily indicate how well he's actually driven in those races. There's been issues on pit road. There's been wrecks. So I'm not too worried about Logano. The guy's a multi-time Cup Series champion. It's way too early in the season for me to get too worried about a guy of his caliber.
Right. All right. Well, let's flip that around as we're looking at Talladega and the upcoming calendar. Who is outside the top 10 right now that you are disappointed by? Someone that you thought would be up there challenging for race wins and just hasn't shown it yet?
Well, to me, it's a two-way tie between Brad Keselowski, who has 0 top 10s to begin this season, coming off of a year where RFK looked extremely strong. And he's got, going back to good surprises, Ryan Preece looks incredible this year, and Chris Buescher is just Chris Bueshering. And then the other has got to be Ty Gibbs. He's looked much better the last couple of weeks. But when you're in a JGR car and you see what Denny Hamlin and Christopher Bell are doing, the lack of speed that team showed up with to begin this year, albeit new crew chief, a bunch of changes during the offseason, that was worrisome to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thankfully, we had predicted, the model had predicted a good showing by Gibbs at Bristol based on, especially on his history there in the Xfinity Series where he dominated. So that third place finish helped our points big time in fantasy this past week. I'm looking at the 19 car. I'm looking at Chase Briscoe as slightly underperforming. I was expecting, yes, new team, new crew chief. It would take time. Yeah. But we're 9 races in. They thankfully got past the penalty. But the history of Martin Truex Jr., that 19 team, and what Joe Gibbs Racing brings to the track, to your point about how well Bell and Denny Hamlin have performed, I think the pressure's on Briscoe here to show up front in this second part of the season and start getting some at least top 5s, if not a win on the board, to really cement his position inside Joe Gibbs Racing and show that transfer out of the Ford camp and into the Toyota camp was not a setback.
Yeah, kind of elaborating on Chase Briscoe here. He was one of the guys that was the most polarizing to me entering the season because he was entering a completely new manufacturer. Us in the betting community, we have this love-hate relationship with the 19 being Martin Truex Jr. and then James Small in particular, with a lot of decisions being made that we kind of put forth towards him as the reason why the 19 didn't necessarily win races in the last couple of years with Truex behind the wheel. But also something I think it's important to realize is that this season began like no other season before it, where we had 2 super speedways. Then we went to Coda. We went to a road course. Then we went to Phoenix. So, I mean, the first month plus of the year, these guys really didn't get a feel of their vehicles. Right. Guys that are in rides odds that they've been in multiple years. And then you look at a guy like Briscoe, again, going back, first year in a Toyota, brand new crew chief, brand new everything. And he went a full month without actually getting to see the type of equipment that he had. And you can see the results starting to improve, similar to Ty Gibbs with a new team around him. So I do think that both of those guys, Chase Briscoe in particular, especially when we start to get to more of his bread and butter type tracks in the middle of the season, he's really going to start to get better on paper too.
Right. Well, hey, we could sit and talk NASCAR all day long. We love it.
Definitely.
That's why we do this. Want to thank Brian for joining us on Go Full Throttle Television today. And you can catch Brian at Brian_twinning on X. You can catch BETSPERTS on X and many other platforms. And make sure you look up the Angle of Pursuit podcast. Great information there for those of you playing in the betting markets. Brian is the source, and his BETSPERTS colleagues can give you the data. Just like we try to equip you with how to play your fantasy teams, Brian's the guy when it comes to the wagering markets. Brian, thanks for being with us today.
Yes, thanks again for having me, and good luck, everybody, on the rest of your season, your fantasy picks, and if you join the betting community, too.
We'll see you next time on GFT TV.